Heading into week 3 of the fantasy football season, here's a few wide receivers I looked at on the waiver wire this week. The first guy's Watkins of the Philadelphia Eagles. So Watkins, he broke 100 yards in this game, even though I know he had a 91-yard catch early in the game versus the San Francisco 49ers in week 2. 2 targets, 2 catches, 117 yards in this game. And in week 1, 3 catches, 23 yards. So right here, he's more of a deeper league ad, is Watkins. But right here, he's an impressive guy, speedster as well, obviously, for this Eagle team. And this Eagle team, they need a couple receivers to step up. We saw in week 1, Jalen Reagor, Devonta Smith have good games, but in week 2, those guys didn't show up. And Watkins, I know it was only 2 catches, but he showed up in the game. And he had a big ball game still with 117 yards. So he's going to be a deep ball threat for Jalen Hurts. And this Eagle team, like I mentioned, their receivers, no one is really broken out where you're like, that's the true number 1 on this Eagle team. So right now, Watkins, he's operating as the 3rd receiver on this team, but he's a guy that's a deep ball threat. He can make plays. And obviously, if you need some wide receiver help, I think he's a pretty good ad this week on the wire. The next wide receiver I looked at is Henry Ruggs of the Las Vegas Raiders. So Henry Ruggs, a high draft pick last season in the NFL draft here from the Vegas Raiders. In week 1, he didn't do much for this Raider team. 2 catches, 46 yards on 5 targets. But here in week 2, had a huge ball game with a huge 60-plus yard touchdown in the game. 5 catches, 113 yards, and a touchdown. And he added also 2 rushing yards. So right here, big ball game for Henry Ruggs. Obviously, he's a deep threat for this Vegas Raider team. And Derek Carr, he likes airing that ball out deep. And he hit him on a perfect pass late in that game versus the Pittsburgh Steelers. And here week 3 for Henry Ruggs, he's got a good matchup versus the Dolphins, where we saw them get torn up by the Bills offense in week 2 here. So Henry Ruggs, he's available right now in 65% of fantasy leagues. And he's a wide receiver that could make plays. He's still young. We know he's got the speed. He just has to learn how to run his routes better and stay healthy. But right now, I think he's worth an ad on the wire this week. The next wide receiver is Zach Pascal of the Indianapolis Colts. So Zach Pascal is a guy I mentioned last week as a waiver wire ad. He had 2 touchdowns last week, and this week here, 5 catches, 38 yards, and a touchdown on 6 targets. So right now, next week, they're going to be at Tennessee, and it looks like it's possibly could be a long season here for the Indianapolis Colts, where they're going to have to throw the football a ton this season. Right here, Carson Wentz, another game, another banged-up injury. We saw him take a gruesome hit by Aaron Donald in this one where he rolled over his leg, and I thought honestly he broke his leg on that play was Wentz. Obviously he got up, which was a good thing, and walked it off, but he didn't return to the ball game, and it didn't look good. So right here, next week they're at Tennessee. Here is Zach Pascal and this Colt team, and we saw Tennessee with a nice come-from-behind victory in overtime versus Seattle. So it's another game where they're going to be trailing, and obviously if Carson Wentz is out, it's going to be a long ball game where they're going to have to throw the football 40 or 50 times here is Indianapolis. And right now with no T.Y. Hilton or any other threat at wide receiver besides Michael Pittman, Pascal's locked into a major role for this Indianapolis Colts team. And he's definitely worth an ad here, available in 85% of fantasy leagues. The next wide receiver I looked at this week on the wire is Ronald Moore of the Arizona Cardinals. So Ronald Moore, the speedster, with a big game yesterday in week 2. And this Arizona Cardinal offense, very explosive, getting up and down the field like it's nothing the first few weeks of the season. And Moore, 7 catches, 114 yards, and a touchdown. Good for 25 fantasy points in PPR leagues. So in week 1, he had double digits with 4 catches, 68 yards in PPR leagues here. Week 2, a good one once again. So right here, he's the deep ball threat. He's a slot guy for this Cardinal team. And right now, he's available still in 67% of fantasy leagues. Here in week 3, another great matchup at Jacksonville. And he's a guy I could trust as a flex option in that ball game at Jacksonville. He's going to make plays. He's a speed guy, like I mentioned. We saw him go for the 77-yard touchdown in this game. And I expect more of the same here in week 3 at Jacksonville. So right now, if Ronald Moore's out there, you definitely give him an ad, because Kyle Murray, I know he's got a lot of weapons. We saw it was Christian Kirk last week. We know we got Hopkins, who had another touchdown in this game, and A.J. Green. But right here, all these guys have a good role, and they're all making plays. And Ronald Moore is definitely an add this week. And the fifth and final wide receiver I looked at this week's KJ Osborne of the Minnesota Vikings. So the Vikings here, they got tons of weapons as well on this offense over there in Minnesota. And Kirk Cousins, he's been playing good football with these guys so far, even though they lost the first 2 games of the season in tough losses towards the end. So Osborne here in week 2, 5 catches, 91 yards and a touchdown. So he's the number 3 wide receiver over here in Minnesota. And right now, he's been very productive the first 2 weeks. Week 1, 9 targets, 7 catches, 76 yards. And then here, week 2, on the 5 for 91, he had 6 targets. So right here, week 3, it's going to be another shootout, in my opinion, for this Minnesota Viking team. Their first home game, home opener of the season. And they versus the Seattle Seahawks coming into town. So both teams, in my opinion, they're going to go up and down the field. And this is another game that's going to come down to the wire or the last possession, in my opinion. And Osborne's been a perfect slot receiver, and he's available in a whopping 98% of fantasy leagues. So maybe in deeper leagues he'll be an add. But he's a guy to definitely keep an eye on, especially in an offense like this. So that's a few wide receivers I looked at on the waiver wire here, heading into week 3 of the fantasy football season.